So why is Tom Vilsack for Agriculture Secretary everything that's wrong with the Democratic Party? Inquiring minds want to know. So here's Claire Kellaway from The Intercept to elucidate. Our planet and rural communities cannot afford 4 more years of Vilsack's aggressive corporatism. On Tuesday, after some public tokenizing and horse trading, President-elect Joe Biden's transition team crowned dairy industry lobbyist and former Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack to lead the Department of Agriculture. Vilsack won out over House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn's pick, Representative Marcia Fudge, who was also backed by progressives. Which progressives were those, I wonder? Whereas Fudge represented an opportunity to unite the USDA's rural and urban constituents and address the agency's long history of racial discrimination, Vilsack is a rerun of pro-corporate policies that continue to drive rural communities away from the Democratic Party. Note to self, we really have to overhaul the use of the word progressive. We may have to just start making fun of progressives the way we make fun of liberals. The Secretary of Agriculture is an underrated and important cabinet member whose work intersects with climate change, worker safety, racial justice, antitrust, rural development, and of course, feeding the country. The COVID-19 pandemic put America's fragile and destructive food system on display. Massive plant closures threatened the food supply, frontline food workers fell sick and died in large and growing numbers, and nearly 1 in 4 households experienced food insecurity. The next Agriculture Secretary has an unprecedented moment to enact much-needed systemic changes in how we grow and distribute food. And this was written back on December 11th, so the COVID numbers have spiked a lot even since then. If Vilsack repeats his Obama-era strategy, we won't see that progress. This is because Vilsack doesn't actually speak to the totality and needs of rural people. In his work at the Department of Agriculture and as a dairy lobbyist, Vilsack represents the powerful few of Big Ag. This reminds me of the same revolving door bullshit with General Austin and Raytheon. As Agriculture Secretary, Vilsack let down independent family farmers when he failed to take on agribusiness domination. Food production is concentrated in the hands of a shrinking number of giant multinational corporations who hold immense power over farmers, workers, consumers, and policymakers. As a candidate, Barack Obama promised to take on Big Ag during the 2008 Iowa caucuses and reiterated the goal at the start of his presidency. Starting in 2010, Vilsack's USDA, along with the Department of Justice, held a series of hearings across the country where farmers shared stories of abuse and anti-competitive conduct by dominant meat packers, such as Tyson or Smithfield, and seed and chemical Goliaths, such as Monsanto. This listening tour culminated in promising new rules to reinvigorate and update the 1921 Packers and Stockyards Act, a progressive-era anti-monopoly law that established fair codes of conduct in the livestock industry. Vilsack had complete authority to finalize these rules, but in the face of industry and congressional pressure, he decided to expand their comment period from the usual 60 days to 150 days, which pushed any finalization past the 2010 midterms. At that point, Republicans took the House in a Tea Party insurgency and proceeded to pass funding riders that blocked the Department of Agriculture from passing the rule. Whoa, that is some insidiously evil bullshit right there. As an aside, this is how Hillary Clinton gets things done. The caption under this photo reads, Hillary Clinton speaks with Agriculture Secretary Tom Vilsack, emphasizing investment in small towns to help strengthen rural America as part of a plan released after Vilsack endorsed her during an organizing event in Baldwin, Iowa on August 26, 2015. This is how Hillary gets things done. And not only Hillary, this is how incrementalists get things done. They don't get things done, and they don't mean to get things done. They don't want to get things done. They don't give a fuck about agricultural communities. Vilsack eventually introduced watered-down regulations of meatpacker mistreatment in his very last days in office, but at this point many farmers who spoke out at risk of retaliation had lost faith. The Trump administration promptly blocked and withdrew these modest reforms and even dissolved the independent office that enforced the Packers and Stockyards Act. Vilsack's USDA also put meatpacker profits over worker and food safety by implementing a new poultry inspection system that, among other changes, opened a door for plants to run at faster speeds and transferred some inspection duties from USDA staff to meatpacking employees. While the department contended this new system would improve food safety, a report by the Government Accountability Office questioned the data behind their claims. In a public comment on the rules, one concerned USDA consumer safety inspector wrote, "If this proposal goes through and inspectors are cut, I would not feel safe enough to feed poultry to my family." Dude, this is the food we eat. This is serious. This proposal also threatened to lift maximum poultry processing speeds from 140 birds per minute to 175. Numerous studies show that faster line speeds increase meatpacking workers' risk of injury, and labor advocates successfully fought to keep speeds down, or so it seemed. Select plants kept loopholes to operate at faster speeds, which the Trump administration later expanded. Trump's USDA has granted waivers for poultry and beef plants to operate at faster speeds even during the pandemic. Meatpackers need to slow line speeds to reconfigure plants and allow for distancing, as recommended by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, between frontline processing workers, but few have budged. Slaughter deregulation is just one example of the ways the Department of Agriculture's policies intersect with broader issues of worker safety and racial inequity, as the majority of meatpacking workers are immigrants and people of color. Historically, the USDA has driven racial wealth disparities by systematically denying black farmers loans or access to other farm supports. These actions contributed to a 98% decrease in the number of black farmers from 1920 to 1997, as well as mass land dispossession that affected 98% of black agricultural landowners. While Vilsack has touted his civil rights record at the department, an investigation by the Counter found Vilsack's USDA promoted misleading and inaccurate claims about an increase in black farmers and a record low in civil rights complaints. Racial lending disparities also persisted under Vilsack's tenure, and Vilsack personally failed to prioritize civil rights, according to accounts from USDA employees. In one case, a longtime civil servant and black farmer, Lloyd Wright, asked Vilsack to rally Senate support for a bill that would have extended the statute of limitations on several valid USDA civil rights complaints that had expired during the Bush years. Vilsack allegedly did nothing, and the bill died in the Senate despite passing the House. "I'm convinced he was never committed," Wright said of Vilsack. Skipping ahead, Vilsack is a solidly establishment choice. That's the conclusion I'll leave you with. And that he's a solidly establishment sack of shit. I'll leave you with that too. And Joe Biden is a sack of shit. And Kamala Harris is a sack of shit. And you voted, maybe, some of you, for a sack of shit. When you vote for a sack of shit, you get a sack of shit. Smells like shit, looks like shit, tastes like shit. It is shit. That's what voting for a corporatist gets you. It's like a whole tank of shit up on top of a hill, and you've released it, and it just keeps coming and coming. Inquiring minds also may want to know, why is Marcia Fudge being nominated to HUD if not tokenism? By Vanessa A. B., also of The Intercept. The guarantee of safe and affordable housing is too important for HUD to continue being treated as the short straw. You may remember from the article I just read to you that Tom Vilsack was tapped to lead the Department of Agriculture and not Marcia Fudge, who was also backed by progressives. These nameless, faceless progressives. I'll have to figure out who these progressives are and if they're actually progressive. My contention over the last few weeks is that there are no progressives in Congress. Also, there are hardly any progressives in the punditry. And probably there aren't many progressives where you live either, just in the rank and file citizenry. This photo caption reads, Representative Marcia Fudge, Democrat of Ohio, talks with reporters outside of the Rayburn House office building in Washington, D.C. on November 16, 2018. Long before a global pandemic pushed even more households to the brink, data collected in January 2019 showed that as many as 500,000 people were unsheltered on any given night. Public housing is and has been suffering from a multi-billion-dollar deficit, a chronic underfunding that has left millions of people in deplorable living conditions. So they didn't give a fuck about you before the pandemic either. As the number of renters increased after the 2007-2009 financial crisis, affordability has steadily plummeted. That financial crisis compliments of Barack Obama. In 2017, almost half of all renters were handing more than 30% of their income to the landlord. For extremely low-income households, the rent burden neared 50%. Meanwhile, despite the Civil Rights Act of 1968's recent golden anniversary, segregation and discrimination continue to plague housing. The guarantee of safe and affordable housing is too important for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to continue being treated as the short straw by incoming White House administrations. Despite HUD's great potential in addressing America's cycle of housing crises, recent administrations have failed to dignify it with leadership experienced enough to hit the ground running. The resumes of the cabinet picks speak volumes. When they are thin on housing experience, one can often presume a grooming for higher office. Andrew Cuomo, HUD Secretary under Bill Clinton, for the eventual job of governing New York. His successor, Mel Martinez, under George W. Bush, for one of Florida's Senate seats. Julian Castro, it was rumored, for vice president to former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. For the young and ambitious man, HUD can be a low-stakes stepping stool. Other resumes tell the story of a White House indebted to its pick, though not so much as to hand them the job they really covet. The latter might explain how Dr. Ben Carson, an accomplished medical surgeon with no background in housing finance, found himself at the helm of HUD under Donald Trump. 2 years into the job, Carson was still confusing REOs, short for real estate-owned properties, with the chocolate sandwich cookie in a very public congressional hearing. REOs? Oreos? Yeah, it's almost the same. A predictable outcome when an agency's mission is an afterthought of the administration. In line with this tradition, the Biden-Harris camp announced on December 8th that it was tapping Representative Marcia Fudge for Secretary of HUD. Sounds like a consolation prize to me. A cursory glance at the Ohio Democrat's career makes clear that she has never led a public housing authority or developed an affordable housing complex. She did serve as mayor of Warrensville Heights, Ohio, but she is not a trained urban planner or former advocate for indigent clients. She has neither represented tenants in housing court nor investigated the banks that fueled the foreclosure crisis. Nor has she managed a shelter for the unhoused, administered disaster relief grants, taught the complex scheme that governs federal housing on Native American land, or published research on housing market conditions. She does not appear to have ever filed suit to enforce the civil rights laws that prohibit discrimination in housing, though she did once work for a county prosecutor. Fudge's tenure in Congress reveals no interest in the housing universe. Since her first election to the House of Representatives in 2008, the Ohio Democrat has sat on 3 House committees: Education and Labor, House Administration, which does not work on housing, and most recently, Agriculture, on which she chairs a subcommittee. Though a subcommittee on housing, community development, and insurance exists, this Congresswoman has never served on it. There's also a section in this article from journalist Jamil Smith reporting in Rolling Stone that 5 years ago Fudge went out of her way to write to the Cuyahoga County prosecutor in support for Lance Mason, a former legislator and county judge in her state. At the time, Mason was serving a 2-year sentence for brutally beating his wife. So here's one of those "have you stopped beating your wife" questions. I think this was included to cast aspersions on her character as well as on Mason's character. I'll let you read that part for yourselves, though. I want to jump to the conclusion here. As the odds of a Biden-Harris victory quickly rose after the election, the Congressional Black Caucus and progressive organizations like Feeding America and the NAACP, there we go, these are the progressives they're talking about, began to call for Fudge's nomination to the Department of Agriculture. The Congressional Black Caucus is certainly not a progressive group, and the NAACP has a lot of old blood in it. A lot of Biden voting blood in it. And as you know about me, I don't see how you can call yourself a progressive if you can in any way advocate voting for a racist, rapist, corporatist asshole like Biden. Back to the story. The organization's recommendation letters highlighted the historic nature of a Fudge appointment who would be the first black woman to lead the agency. More identity politics. But they also cited her politics, a commitment and track record of recognizing the Department of Agriculture's power to alleviate poverty. Implicit in those endorsements was an assumption that Fudge had the substantive experience to enter the job with a vision for her tenure rather than waste months or even years wrapping her head around the agency's dominion. Fudge herself became less coy about desiring the job. As she told Politico in November, "I think it's a natural fit." Despite this push, the post is going to Tom Vilsack, who held it from 2009 to 2017, and who is a revolving door corporatist. Fudge's appointment is still being framed as historic, and certainly it is. The long list of HUD secretaries is overwhelmingly male. The Ohio representative would be the first black woman to grace the top since Patricia Roberts Harris in 1977. But the progress feels shallow. So the point of this argument, I'll cut to the chase, is that it's tokenism. That's what it is, tokenism. And to sum it all up, here's Zishan Alim, also from The Intercept. Biden's cabinet of firsts betrays a cynical approach to diversity. Diversity helps governments contemplate complex challenges. When it's treated as an expedient tactic, its purpose is unraveled. You think? This is an interesting photo with Marcia Fudge out of focus and Joe Biden in focus. His face is a strange combination of devious, cunning, and senile. President-elect Joe Biden has made diversity the watchword for the formation of his incoming administration. From his pick of Kamala Harris as his vice presidential candidate to his mission to assemble a cabinet of barrier breakers, a cabinet of firsts, it's evident that Biden's emphasis on diversity is his opening bid to secure a historic presidential legacy before he's even taken office. On paper, this agenda is laudable, but in practice, Biden has at times demonstrated a thoughtless and vulgar attitude toward diversity, one that degrades its meaning and purpose, and illustrates how Democrats can use the language of multiculturalism without taking bold steps to help marginalized people. Ding, ding, ding! This kind of tokenism, this is me speaking, is just purely racist and ugly. People like Jim Clyburn have to know that this is going on, but Jim's getting paid, so he doesn't give a fuck. It's a stunning example of somebody who's black. Barack Obama is another stunning example of someone who doesn't actually care about the people. He doesn't care about black people. He doesn't care about poor people. He doesn't care about brown people in other countries when he bombs the shit out of them. Establishment politicians and pundits of color are in many ways worse than white ones. When they sell out, it just reeks to high heaven. The increasing salience of anti-racist practices and optics in blue America is driving much of Biden's attention to achieving historic levels of diversity among his personnel. Over the course of the Trump era, the Democratic Party's commitment to inclusiveness of marginalized communities intensified in a response to the emergence of mainstream white nationalist politics. After the murder of George Floyd and the resurgence of a new wave of Black Lives Matter protests last summer, liberals and the left developed a more pronounced interest in thinking of institutional staffing and leadership as critical sites for elevating black voices. And voters of color played a crucial and conspicuous role in Biden's victory on Election Day. Yet, this motherfucker doesn't give a shit about you. Yet, the president-elect's actual execution of his promise to make history with diversity has ranged from questionable to cynical. Many of the most influential and prized positions in the White House, like Chief of Staff, have gone to the typical lot of white men that embody Democratic establishment thinking. In contrast, Biden has been haphazard in his job offerings to people of color. On multiple occasions, Biden offered cabinet positions to women of color that plainly function as consolation prizes after declining to give them jobs they're interested in and qualified for. Skipping ahead, Biden's uneven attention to diversity can be seen in his choices for top White House staff. Key personnel like incoming Chief of Staff Ron Klain, Deputy Chief of Staff Bruce Reed, Counselor to the President Steve Ricchetti, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan are white men who have worked with Biden before. They are, broadly speaking, moderate and corporate-friendly Democrats with some conservative tendencies. Other senior staff positions in the White House also skew notably white and male. It's difficult to overstate how critical a president's inner circle of advisors is. Historian Richard Norton Smith once observed that every president reveals himself by the presidential portraits he hangs in the Roosevelt Room and by the person he picks as his chief of staff. A president's top advisors play an indispensable role in shaping their worldview, determining who has access to them, and executing their political agenda. The senior staff will often literally be in the room to counsel a president as they make many of the defining decisions of their presidency. A true diversity fanatic would consider this set of personnel a key opportunity to use diverse backgrounds to guard against groupthink and to grapple with the rapidly shifting contours of American politics as the neoliberal consensus crumbles. Biden has largely elected not to do so. Biden's handling of his cabinet selection has also raised red flags. Marcia Fudge, a prominent black member of Congress from Ohio, was openly angling for heading the Department of Agriculture. Fudge's congressional career has placed a great deal of focus on agriculture and SNAP benefits, or food stamps, which are a primary responsibility of the Agriculture Department. Biden, though, offered the Agriculture Secretary job to Tom Vilsack, a white man who held the exact position throughout the Obama administration and has since become a lobbyist for corporate agricultural interests loathed by many American farmers. Fudge was then offered up the position of Secretary for the Department of Housing and Urban Development, a gig which, as Vanessa A.B. put it for The Intercept, has long been seen as the short straw of cabinet positions, and one which Fudge has no particular qualifications for. Indeed, Fudge explicitly said in November that she believed black leaders were pigeonholed into HUD. Skipping ahead, a similar ill-fitting consolation prize dynamic arose, David Dayen pointed out in The American Prospect, when Michelle Lujan Grisham, the Latina governor of New Mexico, was offered a position she had no interest in, Secretary of the Interior. The Biden team wanted to give her something instead of her desired post of Secretary of Health and Human Services, a position her previous role as Secretary of Health for New Mexico gave her experience for. Grisham turned the Interior job down. Skipping ahead again, then there was Biden's decision to assign Susan Rice, one of the most prominent foreign policy figures of the Obama era, to run the White House's Domestic Policy Council, appearing to be another example of the incoming administration trying to awkwardly shoehorn women of color into ill-fitting jobs. Domestic policy is not only outside of Rice's wheelhouse, it's a position where many other individuals of color or women could have taken the reins more naturally. Why should a national security vet be the best option for coordinating policy on racial injustice, immigration, healthcare, and combating the coronavirus pandemic? Biden chose to value some combination of personal connections and stocking up on non-white and non-male personnel where they can be squeezed in over meaningful diversity. And now I'll jump ahead to the conclusion. A true commitment to diversity that would fulfill Biden's oft-stated commitment to fostering unity might have pursued a Lincoln-esque team of rivals, the assembly of a cabinet that deliberately leaned into the ideological wars defining the party. Yeah, that's not going to happen. Instead, skirmishes over candidates' identities have helped distract from the fact that Biden's cabinet, with a handful of exceptions, has so far been fairly moderate and not to the liking of left-wing leaders. Nowhere was the power of substituting identity for ideology more evident than Biden's vice presidential pick. After a summer of protests, Biden addressed concerns about racism in the American criminal justice system by choosing a black former prosecutor with a particularly harsh record. No, the people on the left know, all of us know, it's a huge fuck you. Biden is sticking it right in our faces, and he's doing it in a tokenistic and cynical way. Aren't you glad you voted for him? I'm sure as hell glad I didn't vote for him. If you did vote for him, you can be reasonably certain that over the months, if you keep following this show, you're going to get that salt rubbed in your wounds over and over. And I do it in love because I want to make sure that this never happens to us again. No corporate sock puppets, no matter who. We've got to get that completely through our thick skulls.